if I can put this to the group, and perhaps Life Speaker Noel, Starblanket, you will answer this first for us, but what is the importance of the reconciliation process for all of you? And the mics next to you should work. Let me know if you need a hand with any of that. We're good.
Yeah, it works. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that question. Reconciliation, it's a hackneyed word nowadays in our midst, and I don't want to raise an ugly subject, but truth needs to be told. November 1st, our Minister of Education in the province of Saskatchewan stood up, and I know these people are constrained from talking about this. I am not. And this minister got up and spoke critically of treaty education process because of an assignment that was brought home by her son. And great furor erupted. And I think at last count there were something like 1,400 calls for her resignation now. And not only that, from the highest level, this minister voted a decade ago in favor of treaty education in the legislation, and here she is criticizing it. So I was appalled. So much for reconciliation. So it's a hackneyed term, and I was quick to tell people, including educators, we're making giant steps forward in teaching this generation, and then boom, something happens, sets us back a few steps, and but I'm not disheartened. I continue to have hope, because it's this generation of students that are taking on the responsibility for relearning history. And when you talk about historical thinking, we are changing the thinking in Saskatchewan. We're leading the way in Canada. And so I'm very proud to be associated with all of these folks here as part of the teaching of history to these students. And if that wasn't bad enough, a school that I worked in, predominantly Indigenous students, I had spent 2 years teaching them protocols, smudging the language of Cree, which I speak. And I was moved by the Regina Board of Education from that school to 50 other schools. So I went there for one day at the beginning of the school year, and they said, no, you're assigned to the other 50 schools now. And then I was pulled out, and then suddenly the Indigenous advocate at the school, an Indigenous teacher, sent me a message. There was a football team in that high school that was dancing powwow derisively of First Nations people. And I said, and they asked me, would you come in and speak to these? I have experience with Indigenous and non-Indigenous elite athletes, having been involved with an elite junior hockey team in Saskatchewan, and so I'm familiar with the antics of young men. And so I told the Indigenous advocate I was really upset. And I said, I'd rather not come in at this time because I might say something that I would regret or do something, like kick somebody in the rear end. And so I begged off, and I thought to myself, so much for reconciliation. You know, here's the Minister of Education, and then here's these non-Indigenous students. And yet when I go around to other schools, I find non-Indigenous teachers teaching the Cree language. English is their first language. And there they are teaching Cree to these students. I'm amazed, and I go in there and I work with these teachers and these students, and how quickly the young people learn the language and are able to speak it and pronounce it. Just amazes me, and it gives me great hope for all of the teachers and all of the students in the city and in the schools. So in spite of all of these ups and downs, steps forward and steps backward, I continue to have hope. And but my eyes are open. The next generation are learning about reconciliation. It's the parents that have yet to learn about this. There are many who understand, who are enlightened, but there are many, many more who are in denial about this whole process of reconciliation. It even goes to, we have discovered a long-forgotten cemetery on the west side of Regina, Regina Indian Industrial School. And we've succeeded in raising it to the attention of the city fathers, and they've designated it a heritage property, as has the provincial government now. And when we went to the federal government, the Minister for Public Safety is from the city of Regina. And he stands up and he says, oh yeah, we're all for reconciliation. And then we go to have meetings in Ottawa with his staff, and his staff report to us, oh, we don't have a policy on reconciliation. And so we have many non-Indigenous allies who work with us. And I asked them, you're good with these English words, put it together, and I'll present it to Mr. Goodale, the Minister for Public Safety. And they did. And we had a meeting for the Assembly of First Nations in Regina, and I buttonholed him, and I said, here, read this. And in my own inimitable way, I placed it in front of him and made sure he read it. And then, because he had called for difficult discussions, and I said, okay, I have a difficult discussion to raise with you. And so there was one paragraph in which we, the non-Indigenous ally had written about his department staff not, denying that there was a reconciliation policy. He says, I'm very concerned about this, and I will be meeting with the commissioner for the RCMP. And so I was I guess, hopeful about that. So we're making strides, but we're doing so well, and then all of a sudden we get knocked back. And then there are people, as I said, who are in denial about this process of reconciliation, about this history. I've spoken to other school divisions, and particularly in the rural areas of the province. And I've been called a racist because of my interpretation of history. I've been called bitter. I've been called negative and telling half-truths and being told not to ever come back again to that town and that school. So while there's a lot of buzz and a lot of talk about reconciliation, there's a lot of work to do. And we're having these wonderful people here that are leading that way. And in reconciliation and history. We're making history about history, I guess. So I'm very pleased to be invited here and to participate. So that's about reconciliation. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your thoughts about that, Life Speaker Noel Starblanket. We don't have a lot of time left, but if anyone else would really love to chime in, c'est à vous l'appareil. I mean, Calvin is...
I got one thought.
I could see you in the back of your head.
Sure. Well, for some strange reason, I'm sitting here thinking about a book I read, a book called The Sorrow in My Heart, written by Alan Eckert, 1,143 pages of very, very dry history about the life history of Tecumseh. Very sad narrative. And the trials and tribulations he went through and all of the conflicts internally with his community. And, and I found that through life, you try to find mantras and you try to find things that are important. And in that book, on page 120, I don't know why I remember it, but there's this one little phrase that says, if you can't be honest with yourself, then you can't be honest with anybody. And that became sort of a life truth for me. And then I said, those things are important. Then there's this other truth that I live by, and it sort of says, anybody can swim with the current. It's tough to swim against it. And another one is you stand for something or you fall for anything. And so those are the kind of things that get me up every morning. Monday morning, I used to go to work every Monday morning with my hair on fire, ready to go and kick some serious butt, go to make a difference. And by Friday, I was so sick of work and so sick of people, I needed to rest. And I needed a weekend. And I needed to regroup. But during all of that, like Noel talks about those tribulations and those ugly parts, and there's lots of good stuff in there. And I really want to end on the fact is, because people are now understanding it. Noel talked about the children. The children are very honest. The children have a very good sense of playground fairness. And the teachers in our system are saying, yes, I recognize the fact that I grew up in a very privileged environment. I understand that, and they may feel a certain amount of guilt, but they also recognize that it's not right. And they're working very hard, and they're going to make a difference. And if we don't support them, shame on us. That's all I got to say.